In today's business world, change is the only constant, and mastering transformation is the ultimate key to success. Welcome to Shift and Thrive. I'm your host, Natalie Nathanson. Each week, we'll bring you conversations with CEOs who delve into how they successfully drove critical change in their organization. This show is sponsored by Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service B2B marketing agency. Today's guest is a lifelong adventurer, author, and citizen activist. He has dedicated his life to bold action and service, from supporting peace building in the Middle East as a diplomat to surviving a burning cruise ship in the North Pacific. He has faced numerous extraordinary challenges head-on. He's a worldly public speaker who inspires audiences to find meaning and take bigger risks. He's also passionate about engaging younger generations and has done this in part through a very successful TikTok series called Badass Grandpa, which I certainly want to hear more about. His nonprofit empowers individuals to stand up for what matters most. He is the founder and executive director of the Giraffe Heroes Project. John Graham, welcome to the show.
I'm delighted to be here, Natalie, just delighted. Oh, by the way, I got to say right away, I didn't found the Giraffe Heroes Project. My wife, Ann Medlock, did. I'm not smart enough or creative enough to do that. So, just a minor correction there, just in case. Ann, if you're listening, I corrected it. Okay, you started it. Yep.
Give credit where credit is due. Thank you
Absolutely.
for that, John. So I've just primed our listeners that this will be a bit of a different kind of conversation. And one of the reasons I've been looking forward to it is really tackling some of the themes that keep coming up in my discussions, but through a very different lens. And so with other guests, we've talked about topics like pushing through fear and decision-making, how our own risk tolerance as a leader impact the organization overall. So topics that I know we'll be delving into. But I want to start the conversation by asking you about something that jumped out to me that you said, and I'll quote you here. You had said, "What's important is not the risk you take, but what you take those risks for." So can you share with us, what this means to you and, how have you learned this for yourself?
What I mean by that phrase is that what's absolutely important in life, and we all feel that, and people have for millennia, is the search for the meaning in our life. So if you take a risk, you got to know what you're taking them for, which is to say, what are you? What makes up you? What drives you? And that goes to this core question of life meaning. And that has driven my life. I speak a lot about courage. And my whole life started with plenty of examples of physical courage. We can get into that later, the crazy-ass adventures that I've been through. But in the last 45 years, especially with the Giraffe Heroes Project, we're dealing with the kind of courage that it takes to innovate, the kind of courage that it takes to do something new, to take risks when other people in your company or in your community or in your nation are going off in directions you don't like, to stand up and say something about it. But the explanation of that phrase is I think that the most important search for any of us is the search for meaning. And I found out a little late in life, about when I was 40 or so, that the real source of meaning, the permanent source of meaning that really counts, is some kind of service. I don't mean sackcloth and ashes. I mean some kind of making intent to make the world a better place, which you can do, of course, as a business person and entrepreneur, as well as a nonprofit leader or in government or the professions.
Do you have any kind of guidance or framework if someone, let's say, has been going through their life and maybe they've had their career, their family, so they've always felt like they've had, that purpose or meaning, but maybe feel like something's missing? How does one go about exploring that?
Well, if you feel something's missing, you've taken an enormous first step. I know maybe you do too. A lot of people that think they found meaning in something, and I certainly don't want to make anyone feel wrong now, but my sense and my experience is that in the long term, you just don't find it from making a whole lot of money or amassing a whole lot of power. Those are, fine. I'm a capitalist. I have no problem with that. What I've been finding in my own life, and especially from the roughly 2,000 people that we've honored on the Giraffe Project for sticking their necks out, for doing good in the world, is that the real meaning comes from some kind of giving back, some kind of recognition that what's most important is not third quarter earnings. What's most important is the service you can deliver in business or an entrepreneur, for example, by creating a great product, selling it at a fair price, observing environmental standards, being a good neighbor in your community, taking a wider view of your industry, and looking at the good of your community and your nation and the world as you make your product or deliver your service. So yeah, I'm very much got a foot in the business world because I recognize, especially in the entrepreneurial world, that courage is key. And my life is about courage. That's what I teach. And so it isn't just political activists that I talk to. It's business people as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're making me think about, companies as an entrepreneur, especially. I think you breathe and kind of put all of your blood, sweat, and tears into the business. You're investing so much time and effort. And I think for a lot of leaders, ideally, this comes from first, I think, your company's mission, and then how do you tie that to your own values and the organizational values, and then, how you structure your organization. So to your point about, is it kind of the environmental impact, the relationship you want to have with your employees, the type of companies you want to work or not work with as customers, that all of those things really kind of tie back to feeling like you have a kind of purpose and mission in what you're doing as a business.
Yes, and I know purpose and mission are great words and used often in the business world. And for me, I use the word meaning, and I guess we're basically saying the same thing. A company's mission statement, for example, if it's valid and honest, has something to do with the meaning of that company. What do you do in business for? What are you doing it for? And that's important. So I'm constantly looking for ways to connect people to what's meaningful. And some people haven't even looked. I mean, I was in my early 40s or late 30s anyway, before the idea of looking for a real meaning ever occurred to me, because I thought that I had found the meaning for my life as a young man. I thought the meaning of life was adventure. I thought that adrenaline rush was the sine qua non of living. That's all that mattered to me. And so my life was very, very shallow, I must admit, very shallow. All I cared about was my own self-interest, and my own self-interest in those early decades was about taking risk. And because I kept walking away from all kinds of dangerous things, I just assumed that I was right. Yes, my life is about taking risks. I don't really give a damn about you. I don't give a damn about what you're doing. I give a damn about the next risk, the next crazy-ass adventure I'm going to go on. That changed, obviously. But I learned a lesson finally, and it happened, quite frankly, in the middle of a bitter battle in Vietnam. That I couldn't keep living with my life that shallow. Life has to be broader than that. There has to be a life meaning that makes sense. And that's why when people try to succeed in business, but they don't really believe in it, that's why they fail. That's why they fail. Oh, this is a great new product. We designed this. Our engineering teams are terrific. But in your heart of hearts, you really don't believe in that product. You don't believe in why you're providing that service. You're uncertain about why you should even be coming into the office. You're not going to succeed. You're just not going to succeed. There's not enough glue unless there's a meaning, unless the product or the service has real meaning for you.
Right, right. I mean, you're making me think about my own business. I started Magnitude Consulting 12 years ago, really with this kind of passion and drive for helping smaller companies compete against the big guys and help them essentially like punch above their weight. And so it was a drive and a belief that kind of done right and using all the modern kind of technology that's out there, that marketing could really be a growth enabler to the business, and companies can kind of fundamentally compete in a different way than they could before. And especially companies that have a kind of positive impact on the world. So one of the industries we specialize in, for example, is cybersecurity, right? So feeling like we're working with clients and helping them get their name out there and grow their business, and the work that they're doing is so important to the world. increasingly more and more these days as we see all the challenges around us.
Yeah. And I talk to a lot of people, including a lot of business people, about the necessity of creating a strong, vibrant vision for their company or their entrepreneurial activity. And I know vision is a big word in the business world, as well it should be. But a lot of people don't quite understand what it is. Too often people think a vision is it's kind of a dream. It's like something you write on the wall and show to your board or whatever. But for me, a vision is a picture of real results. So if you have an entrepreneurial venture, let's say in cybersecurity, your vision needs to revolve around why you're doing it. You have to also, of course, master the technical side of it. You have to do the engineering side of it. You have to have a good product, of course, or you're going to fail. But beyond that, you need to have a vision that's meaningful to you. And you mentioned it. It has to be something about making the world a better place, because a world that is safer from cyber threat is a world in which we can all prosper, and in which fewer people will be hurt, and more people will have a better life. So it's important to keep that in mind. As I said 20 minutes ago, life is not about third quarter earnings. Don't get me wrong. I know they're important. I know how tough it is to be an entrepreneur. I know the challenges. I've talked with enough business people, but at the same time, you need to understand what's really important is what brings you meaning. And that rarely is just third quarter earnings.
Agreed, completely. John, I want to talk a little bit about, risk taking and courage and dive in a bit deeper there. I think before we talk about the topic in general, is there a story from your own life that comes to mind that required the most courage, or something that you wanted to do but really had to push through fear?
Well, there's a lot of things. And in the very beginning of my life, beginning when I went to sea on a freighter when I was just 17 years old, a lot of it was just physical until that time of a battle in Vietnam. But yeah, as my life began to turn around, I ended up as a diplomat at the United Nations, for example. And here's just one example, and there were many. At the time, in 1979, the 53 Americans had been captured by an Iranian mob and were being held hostage in Iran. Now, many of our listeners today, probably weren't even born then, but it was an important part of history. And because the relationships between Iran and the United States were so bad, they captured these 53 people. We didn't know in this country whether they were going to kill them or what. So we were really disturbed about that and couldn't get them out. At the same time, I was at the United Nations, and my job was to keep track of what was going on in the entire then called Third World, the global South, the poor nations of Africa and Asia. And my job was to keep track of them. And the third thing was that I was at the United Nations at a time when relationships between the U.S. and Cuba were really bad. In fact, they were so bad, I was forbidden from even talking to the Cubans, which seemed really stupid to me, because wasn't the United Nations a place where you talk to everybody, even your enemies? Well, I guess not. Anyway, I've never been one to obey rules very well, so I talked to the Cubans a lot, in part, quite frankly, because they were baseball nuts as well as I. So we would talk, not where people could see us, but in parks or restaurants around the UN complex. And the conversation might be what was going wrong with the Red Sox pitching that year, or something like that. Anyway, I developed some real friendships because the Cubans were fun-loving. And as far as I could tell, they were honest communists, sure, but they were honest communists, and we had a lot of fun together. Anyway, we're both all in Belgrade in Yugoslavia, because they'd gone there for a meeting, and as part of my job, I had to be at least in the same city as the non-aligned, the third world nations, so I could kind of figure out what was going on. And because I knew most of the people there, I was the ideal person to send. So I was there. The Cubans were there. I knew the Cubans, and they invited me out for dinner. And I said, sure. Now, the Cubans, of course, were communists, so they were really unhappy at having to accept a black limo from the Yugoslav government. But they did it, and they were not going to go to dinner in the high rent section of Belgrade. They insisted on driving across the tracks to the workers' section of town and going to a workers' restaurant. And so we had a great dinner of rice and beans and way too much red wine. So about midnight, after I don't know how many bottles of wine, and we stopped talking about Red Sox pitching. We started talking politics. And of course, we talked about the American hostages in Iran, because that was the big deal. That had just happened a month or two before. And in the middle of this dinner with a lot of wine, one of my buddies, Cuban buddies, Raul, says, "Hey, John," he says, "yeah, that's a real problem for you guys. I think we could probably do something to get your people out of jail, out of being hostages in Iran." I leaned forward and I said, what do you got in mind? He says, "Well, our president, Fidel Castro, happens to have really good relationships with the Ayatollah Khamenei, who's the head of Iran. And maybe Castro could be an intermediary and get your people out." So I'm no dope, so I lean forward and I say, "Raul, okay, what's in it for you guys?" He says, "Well, it's simple." He says, "Your economic embargo is strangling our country. You lift it, or at least you lift the major parts of it. So you lift the embargo, and we'll get your people out of Iran." Well, okay. So then the meal ends, and we all go back to New York. And because it was a deal made literally on the back of a napkin, and we were all drunk, I didn't think much about it. But I'm in the UN hall, and Raul comes up to me, and behind a pillar where nobody could see us, he whispers, "Hey, Jean," he says, "we'll do it. The old man says we'll do it." I says, "What are you talking about?" He was really annoyed with me. And he says, "Castro will become that intermediary. He'll talk to the Ayatollah in the terms of the deal that we talked about at the restaurant in Belgrade." Oh my God. So I go running across the street to my headquarters, and I announce all this to my masters, and it's a big shock to them because I'm not even supposed to be talking to the Cubans, let alone forming a earth-shaking deal with them on a major global issue. But nonetheless, I figure, hell, I get the hostages out of Iran. They should think that's a good thing, right? I'll get at least patted on the back. Maybe I'll get the Nobel Peace Prize. Who knows? Oh, that didn't happen. Boy, was I naive. The answer comes back from Washington. No way we're going to give Castro the credit for anything. So, no, you have to tell the Cubans that we're not going to do that. And by the way, you're lucky you're not fired or worse, because you're not even supposed to be talking to them. So I leave. I'm disappointed. But I had taken a terrible risk. But I was doing the right thing, because I clearly could have been fired. And I was really enjoying my career at the United Nations. I could have been fired. So in that, a long answer to your question is that was one example of where I was confronted with the idea of doing the right thing that would help a whole lot of people, getting 53 people out of harm's way, 53 American hostages. And I had the contacts to do that. But I knew at the end, in order to make it work, I had to confess to all of the off-campus, out-of-school things I was doing with the Cubans, which could easily have gotten me fired. But I did it anyway, because it was the right thing to do, and I luckily wasn't fired. I got my knuckles rapped. So that was one example where an important issue. I took a chance. It turned out the chance failed. Other chances I took at the UN succeeded, and we can talk more about that later if we have time. But this was an important one.
Yeah.
And it was important to learn also that, as my mother used to tell me, no good deed goes unpunished. Is that the saying? No good deed
Yes.
goes
Yep.
unpunished.
Yeah.
And so I learned that lesson in spades.
Yeah. I mean, what a story. First off, thank you for sharing that. It feels like a piece of history coming to life. But I think it also, such an important lesson around doing the right thing and kind of pushing through fears. I think it does put into perspective some of the kind of just fearful decisions in decision making in business that might feel very high stakes at the time, but on a very different level than a hostage crisis. I was having dinner with a group of CEOs yesterday, and one of them is facing a pretty difficult business decision. And we were just talking about, all these times in the past when each of us has had to make difficult decisions and how it's so hard in the moment to trust that everything will be okay. But that oftentimes, there's not necessarily a right or wrong decision. You have to kind of take the information you have and make the best decision possible. But at the time, it feels like there's only kind of one right or wrong decision to make. I'm curious, like, what would you say to that? How do people, how does someone push through fear and do the right thing for themselves?
I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but I would say you got to look beyond the short term. It might in fact devastate the company's earnings for a while because it was the wrong decision. But the key thing is it the right thing to do? Is your vision one that is that carries out a positive vision for the company and for yourself? And that's the key thing to ask, because if you make a decision and you don't really believe in it, you're doing it because it's practical, because your best advisors tell you to do it, because you're scared of making the opposite decision. These aren't good enough reasons. And you probably fail. You got to make that decision because you look ahead. You're looking ahead 5 years, 10 years, whatever, to see what the impacts of that decision are. And if the impacts of that decision you're taking and it pans out, help a whole lot of people because it's a better product, sold at a fair price, because it serves the community, because it makes some positive difference in the world, then that's one thing. But if you're making that decision and you can't say that, you're doing it just because of the pressures, just because of the fact that your last quarter earnings were poor, just because of the fact that the bond market is not where you want it to be. That's pretty shaky ground.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's the expression that people say, like, follow the money. It sounds like we're really talking about follow the passion. And then
yes,
the other decisions will, fall into place.
Follow the money might be fine for a detective on a crime show, and which I watch, but it's not. It's not a sufficient means of making a decision with long-term implications.
Right. And John, I'd love to talk a little bit about, your own approach to leadership or your leadership style. How do you describe that?
Well, it's interesting. I try with everybody I talk to put my leadership in the context of my personal meaning, which I am very careful to tell people what it is, and I ask them about what's meaningful to them, so that they know that what we're trying to do together, leader, follower, co-leaders, whatever, is in sync with each other. It's hard to say. It's a very interesting question. Certainly, a lot of the conventional kinds of leadership styles I endorse. Leading by example being perhaps the best one. But the other is also constantly introducing the higher concepts of meaning into the decision making so that people know where I'm coming from. And people have a lot more respect for that. People have a lot more respect. If I get mad at people and say, God damn it, you messed up there because they're never going to buy a product like that, or the financing is too shaky, or you've made a mistake there, fine. Leaders have to make tough decisions, and sometimes they have to make tough remarks sometimes. But I'm just saying that overall, people have to understand that I'm coming from a place of vision, and that vision is about what's meaningful to me and what I think is meaningful for the company.
Yeah, and I think, in the podcast in general, we talk a lot about, transformation and how do you kind of transform your organization. And such a critical component is leaders having that critical vision and communicating that regularly, and also, though, putting it into the context of, all the different people in the organization, the different groups, and both the what's in it for them, the how their role or function matters. And so I think as you're talking about your own style, like your own meaning, but also like what does it mean to the person you're talking to? and interacting with. I think that's a really empathetic way to kind of bring everyone along for the ride, so to speak.
It's interesting. Your viewers can see behind my head over there a cover of the first book I wrote, which is Outdoor Leadership. I wrote my first book on leadership was about leading as a mountain climber, leading expeditions and leading people in the outdoors in situations that were inherently physically dangerous. And I wrote that book because I was constantly being asked to do seminars on leadership, especially by climbing clubs, for example, that were that had a poor record in terms of fatalities or whatever. And part of they hired me for was to teach people the kinds of leadership that would keep people alive in the mountains and hopefully get them to the top of whatever they were climbing. And there were lots of aspects of that, and so many of them are pretty conventional, and they're all transferable to the business world. Forming a team, for example, absolutely critical to get the right people on your team. Listening to people, and again, half of that book is about creating a vision with the people on your team, a vision that's more than just getting people to the top of the mountain, a vision that's about all of you getting to the top safely and as a team and having the thrill of a team effort, things like that.
Yeah, you're making me think about a guest I had on the podcast a few months ago, someone named Christian Hyatt, who leads an organization called Risk 360. And he, within his organization, started organizing these kind of high adventure, kind of gritty type of team events like the Tough Mudder and other events like that. And it sounded like it's had a tremendous impact on kind of the culture, the teamsmanship within the organization, like being through those kinds of experiences together, just had such a positive impact on their organization. So I think those experiences do have such a parallel to the business world and how we operate with one another.
Yeah, the whole last chapter of this book is about the business and professional world, because by the time I got to that end of the book, I realized that I had a broader audience than just climbers and people who were willing to go out and do risky things in the outdoors. But there was a huge coming together, a huge what's the right word I'm looking for? There was a likeness, there was a compatibility between these kinds of risks in the outdoors and risks in the business world. And in point of fact, it was a shift that was important to me, because when I first started to learn about leadership, when I first started to realize the impact of courage, it was all physical, because that was easy for me. I mean, I was big and tough and smart, and nobody messed with me. So taking physical risk for me was relatively easy, and taking non-physical risks sometimes terrified me. For example, apologizing for a hurt, for example, or being emotionally immature and lashing out at someone or whatever. So, those kinds of mistakes. Those kinds of things really terrified me, but physical risk didn't. And what I finally learned was what we were talking about 5 minutes ago, was that there's a huge congruence between the two kinds of risks, and that really they were alike in so many ways. And that's what allowed me to take a lot of the risks that I've taken since that aren't necessarily physical. I realized the transferability of what I learned about taking risks in the outdoors and physical risks to difficult business and entrepreneurial risks. For example, I remember once I was in a tough mountain climb on a steep, icy face in Washington State. And the last part of the climb was a 300-foot, just about sheer ice cliff. And it was really hard climbing. And so I started up first, and I had another guy tied to the end of a rope. But he wasn't having a good day. I don't know, the altitude was getting him or whatever. But he was having a hard time. Now, a rope is 150 feet, so only halfway up this cliff is I could get climbing. So halfway up this cliff, I have to affix myself to the cliff, which climbers know how to do. You put bolts into the ice and you hang from them, okay? And if you do it right, you don't fall. Okay. So I did that. I'm hanging from the cliff, and I turn around to, let's call him Paul, and I say, okay, Paul, your turn. And so he starts climbing up, and he falls 2 or 3 times. I hold the rope in a way that climbers know how to do, called a belay. I hold the belay, and I catch his fall, and finally he comes up. And when he comes up, he's like in really sad shape. His face is green. He's mumbling. He's clearly panicked. And it's a really bad situation because it's taken so long. It's now getting dark, and here we are hanging from the middle of a cliff, and looking down thousands of feet, and I have to get up the last 150 feet to the summit of the mountain so that we're both safe. Now, for me to climb, he has to belay me. In other words, he has to hold the rope so that if I fall, I don't fall those thousands of feet. So I go up a little bit. I put an ice screw into the ice. I put the rope through it so that if I do fall, I hang on that ice screw. Then I go another 30 feet, another 20 feet. So finally, I'm up at the top of the mountain. That's the way climbers do it. That's technique. The thing is, though, is that I have to depend upon Paul to hold the rope. And if he's panicked, if he's absolutely out of it, he won't be able to do that. And so if I climb up 20, 30 feet and I fall, he won't be able to hold the rope. It'll pull that clamp right out of the ice, and we'll both fall because I'll carry him down too. So it's really a life and death situation. So I have a decision to make there. What do I do? I finally decide there's no way. I have to decide on Paul. But how do I get us both in this pickle? So I do something that no book on leadership advises, that I don't advise, that I've never taught to anyone. I grab him by the neck, by his parka, and I belt him across the face. Bam, bam, bam. And I shout at him, Paul, you got to get your act together. Because if I go up there and fall and you don't hold me, I'm not only going to get killed, you're going to get killed too. And you understand that. And finally, I bring him back around just a little bit. And he says, okay, I understand. So I start up. Luckily, I don't fall. So we're never really tested. My theory is never really tested whether slapping him was a good idea or not. But it was a really difficult decision to do something that is anathema in mountain climbing circles, as it is, for example, in the armed services. You don't slap people around. But in this case, I saw no other course. It was the right thing to do. So that was a really difficult decision. And I did it, and it was the right thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly no playbook for a lot of decisions we have to make. I like something you said about the transferability of risk and kind of the intellectual or business risk versus, physical. How would you say someone can build a greater risk tolerance in business? Like, is pushing ourselves physically and physical risks, does that work? What other advice do you have on how to build greater risk tolerance?
Well, physical risk was the way I took it, but you can't say that for everybody. Some people just aren't capable of taking the physical risk. But yeah, that's a path up there. But for sure, start by taking, how shall I say this, acceptable risks. Start by looking at smaller decisions and testing yourself and see how it goes. If you start panicking at small risks, then take one that's less than that. And begin to ask, well, why are you panicking? Oh, I didn't do my homework. So I got blindsided by that because I didn't. Oh, well, you better do a better job with your homework. You better understand what's going on. I didn't understand how my opponents, my competitors were going to react. Well, maybe you should have done a bit of research on that as well. Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, well, I didn't read the right books. I didn't have the right skills to do this. Well, fine. Before you started, you should have developed those skills, perhaps. Read some books on that issue. Maybe the issue is on understanding AI, and you sail right into the risk without understanding what the hell AI was going to do with this decision. A lot less risky if you know what you're doing, Paul, or whoever the person's name was. So you start small. You learn from your mistakes, and then you climb up the ladder until you're ready to take the kind of risk that could be seminal for your company or your organization. But start small, learn to prepare, do your research, take a close assessment of your own skills. If you need a new skill, develop it um, by reading a book or by practice or by asking other people. And then finally, decide whether or not this is a solo risk or not. Maybe the smart thing to do is to form a team, form a collaboration, and then train the team. And then all of you take the risk. Maybe that's the way to go. And maybe the reason you failed on that risk before is because you tried to do it by yourself and it was just too much. So form a team. So there are all kinds of ways to learn. None of this is earth-shaking. I'm sure every business people listening to me talk says, yes, of course, you have to know what you're doing. Yeah, John's right. Yeah, of course. Well, I'm just saying, don't forget that. Don't forget that, because a lot of people get so excited, especially some of the entrepreneurs that I know, maybe you know too. They just want to sail right into it because they're so passionate about it. And it's so hard. It's so hard. It's like trying to climb a mountain and just say, oh, man, I got to get to the top. I'll be a hero if I get to the top. Well, if you haven't, for example, figured out where the avalanches are coming down that might kill you, well, that's pretty stupid. You got to spend some time learning where the avalanches come down or whatever. Weather reports? Nah, they didn't look at well, you better look at the weather report because that could kill you too. So, yeah. Look at the things that cause us to rush into things. That's often a mistake. So be calm, do your homework, assess the odds, assess your own skills, figure out whether you need a team, all of these things, and all done initially anyway, at a level where you're not risking everything when you're not fully prepared. You can build up to those kinds of risks, but don't start there.
Yeah, very good advice. Thank you, John. I'd love to hear a little bit more about you. And I know you've lived quite an exciting life and have had all kinds of adventures. Can you take us back a bit? What was maybe some highlights of your childhood or kind of key moments that you could share with us?
Oh, sure. I could talk all day about those things. You mentioned that I had a podcast going, a video thing going on TikTok. Oh, by the way, if anyone wants to dial in, it's called Badass Granddad with 2 Ds, not Grandpa. Badass Granddad. And there are just 3-minute videos on TikTok because I realize I do a lot of talking and podcasts and stuff, but mostly it's to adults. And I wanted to reach a younger audience, so that's TikTok and Instagram. So it's 3 minutes, and it's called Badass Granddad. It's on TikTok, and it's adventure stories, plus a little life lesson tied to the adventure story, plus a call to action of some kind. And I'm getting terrific feedback. A lot of young people are listening. And to my surprise, the comments aren't snarky at all. They're really good comments. Some of them are just, way to go, Grandpa. That's great. I wish I had a granddad like you. But the other half of the comments are young people looking for answers about the kind of questions we're talking about today. Well, why do you take risk? And I'm scared when I do that or whatever. And a lot of the answers I'm able to give are what we're talking about today, Natalie. After telling an adventure story, these young people are willing to listen because they know that, in point of fact, I know something. I'm worth listening to. Anyway, you ask about the stories, and I have many, many of them. And I use them as a wedge. I like to talk to tough audiences. Sometimes business people are a tough audience, and sometimes in talking to a tough audience, my biggest tool is my biography, is these stories. Because when a room full of CEOs hear me talk, or maybe in a boardroom presentation, or maybe I'm talking to their annual meeting, 3,000 people in a hotel ballroom or something like that, and they're all looking at their phones and stuff, and who is this guy? He comes from the nonprofit world. Oh, really? If I'm given 45 minutes, I'll spend 35 minutes telling adventure stories until they get that I know more about risk-taking than the whole room of them put together. So they listen, and they're on the edge of their seats. So when I pivot and start talking about what I really want to talk about, which is how my own life changed and how I learned to take the right kind of risk and create vision, they're ready to listen. So anyway, that's a long prep toward the story. I'll tell you one story. We can talk more, but this is one that I tell a lot because frankly, it's a good story. I'm in the Foreign Service, right, for 15 years. And then I at the United Nations, I learned that life is not just about me. It's about making the whole world a better place. So I'm fighting for peace and justice issues at the UN. And I realized that I'm getting a lot of feedback that's not helpful. For example, the feedback on my Cuba caper. I can't deal with that. I can't keep following orders from people who are too small-minded to know what's going on in the world. So I quit. I quit the Foreign Service, even though I was at the top of my game. And so I'm in New York City, and I'm thinking naively that my wonderful lectures, because I've always had a good gift of gab, my wonderful lectures will change the world. I'll give lectures on peace and justice or ending the Cold War, which was raging at that time. But very few people came to my lectures. I didn't realize then that lecturing at people to do good isn't a very good technique. Never has been. So I'm running out of money because I'm spending the severance I got from the Foreign Service. So I'm running out of money. And a friend of mine says, "Look, you do have this gift of gab, John. You're good on your feet. You know that cruise ships pay a lot of money for people like you to tell stories, to talk about things like foreign policy, for example. You're a UN diplomat. So get a job on a cruise ship." Oh, okay. I get a job. The very first effort, I get a job lecturing on a cruise ship going from Vancouver to the Far East and back. I get to take my daughter, then 13, Mallory, with me. So Mallory and I journey out to Vancouver and get on board this cruise ship. My job is to, excuse me, is to give 2 lectures in the whole trip about, oh, they didn't care what I talked about, foreign policy or whatever, NATO, whatever. Because I also learned the cruise ship is mostly older people, and that a good part of my job was to look handsome in my tuxedo and waltz little old widows around the dance floor. I didn't know that, but okay, fine. I wondered why they wanted me to take my tuxedo, but there it was. So I'm lecturing on the cruise ship and dancing little old widows around the dance floor. 3 days off the coast of Alaska, the ship catches fire and ultimately will sink 9 days later. But they tried to put the fire out and they fail. And they give us all kinds of messages that there's nothing to worry about. But we're supposed to come up to the ship's promenade deck so they can air the ship out, get rid of all the smoke. So Mallory and I, my daughter, are completely disarmed. And we go up to the promenade deck, and it's pretty clear the fire has not been put out. It's getting blacker and thicker. And it's cold. This is October in the Gulf of Alaska, freezing out there. So we can't go into the ship's lounge or the restaurant because they're full of smoke too. So people are ripping curtains off the windows or taking up tablecloths, trying to stay warm, wrapping themselves in tablecloths. And we're all on the promenade deck and looking kind of worried because the smoke continues to get blacker and thicker. Clearly, the fire's not been put out. The ship's captain has been lying to us the whole time about the fire's been put out. So this is like 2 o'clock in the morning now, 3 o'clock in the morning. Everyone's getting a little scared. So we're told to go to the stern of the ship, the fantail, where free drinks will be served, etc. And they give us more reassuring words, but it's not very reassuring. A helicopter flies over and drops CO2 canisters, and guys in firefighting suits are disappearing into the ship. And the smoke is now curling up the sides of the ship, not just through the stairwells. It's looking pretty bad. People are getting scared. So the captain then gives the order, says, "Okay, I'm afraid we've lost the fight with the fire. I want you to all go to your lifeboat station." So Mallory and I go up to lifeboat number 2 on the port bow and look back. The ship looks awfully, the little lifeboat looks like it's going to be very crowded. And there are like 75 people waiting to get in the lifeboat. But the sign on the side of the lifeboat says it's made for 45, so that's not good. And then worse, the fire finally burns through the last of the retaining walls and windows in the lounge and the restaurant, and a huge pillar of flame about 20 feet high erupts from the center of the ship. Right, this huge tower of flame erupts in the center of the ship, and now people, of course, are really scared and they're backing away from the flames. But you can't fall into the Gulf of Alaska in October because you'll die of hypothermia in 5 minutes. And so, I mean, people have seen Titanic. Well, that's the situation we were in. Oh, by the way, I forgot to say that one thing the captain did was assemble the ship's orchestra before we got into the lifeboats. And it was so much like Titanic. Mallory and I went to see that movie when it came out. We were just holding each other because we were in such a similar situation. So anyway, he gives the order to abandon ship. So we all get into these lifeboats. And luckily, everybody gets into a lifeboat and nobody is killed, even though the ship's crew seems incompetent in terms of lowering the boats. We all get into lifeboats and we're all begin to drift away from the Princeton Dam, the name of the ship, and wait for the dawn. And at dawn, a big oil tanker arrives, answering the SOS, and helicopters arrive. But we're 140 miles from the coast, so it takes a while for helicopters to arrive. And when they arrive, they start lowering a metal chair on the end of a chain, kind of like you see maybe at a county fair. Kids go whirling around in a metal chair. Anyway, so they lower a chair, and one at a time, we put one person into that chair. They get hoisted up into the helicopter. And when the helicopter has maybe 7 or 8 people, it flies off to the deck of the tanker, drops the 7 or 8 people, comes back for more. But it's a very slow process. Not only that, but what is calm when they were put into lifeboats, a typhoon is bearing down. Typhoon Victor is bearing down on us. So the weather's getting worse and worse and worse. So it's a fight against time. And I watched my daughter Mallory lift it off about noon. And by the way, people might wonder how we knew who goes first. Well, the only guidance we had was from all the grade B movies we'd seen, which is, of course, women and children first. So we put the women and the children. There weren't many children. This was a cruise ship, so old folks, the women and the old folks. So about noon, there's only about 20 or so men left on lifeboat number 2. Everyone else has been taken to safety on the freighter. There actually was an oil tanker. And so we're left there. The helicopter makes 1 more trip, 2 more trips, until there's only about 8 of us left. But then the helicopter can't fly anymore because we're in the middle now of a typhoon, and it's deadly for a helicopter to try to hover that close over a lifeboat in the middle of a typhoon. So the helicopters are gone for good. And our only chance, 8 of us in lifeboat number 2, is for a Coast Guard ship, a cutter, to find us. And now the storm has hit full on, and the visibility is down to around 100 yards, 100 meters. And we're all dying of hypothermia, and it's a 1 in a million shot, so it seems, for the helicopters to find us for the Coast Guard cutter to find us in those conditions. But it's the only chance we have. And I figure, knowing my experience in mountaineering, that we have 4 or 5 hours to live. I know what hypothermia is like. You start getting really cold, but then you get warm again. Then you go to sleep and you don't wake up. That's how you die from hypothermia. So we're in the middle of that sequence. And if a Coast Guard cutter doesn't come soon, we're going to be dead. And they'll just find our bodies in that lifeboat if we're not thrown out in a storm. The key thing, though, is the light. The Coast Guard cutter is looking for us in shallow daylight and with poor visibility. And the odds are poor enough that it'll find us. But if it gets dark, we have no flares, we have no lights, we have no mirrors, we have no way to signal the Coast Guard cutter, we have no radios. So if it gets dark, the odds are being found by that cutter disappear to 0. So now it's about a half an hour until dark. And I realized then that I've escaped a violent death a dozen times in my life up to that point. And every time I've walked away from it. But now it looks like I'm going to die. It looks like my luck has run out. That doesn't seem right to me. I mean, so I want to check in. I'm not a religious person, right? But I figure I know nothing else to do but to try to pray or whatever prayer is. But I want to talk to God. I want to talk to the guy upstairs. So I try to pray, and I start by saying, "Hey, wait a minute. I know. My early life was pretty damn shallow, but then I got into the United Nations, and I almost got those people out from being hostages in Iran. And I've done a lot of good work at the UN. And now I'm being wiped out. I mean, I went to a Jesuit high school. I know about order in the universe, right? I mean, there's an order in the universe. I mean, we're snowflakes that have order. So the whole universe is ordered. But there's no order in wiping me out now because now I'm a good guy. I'm doing the kind of stuff that I thought you, God, wanted me to do. I'm a good guy. And now you're killing me. It makes no sense whatsoever. So my prayer turns into this angry bleat. I get really mad at God for wiping me out, and it didn't make any sense at all. Until I hear a voice. The other 7 guys in that lifeboat don't hear a thing, of course, but I hear a voice like it's in loudspeakers surrounding me. And this voice, maybe it was my own addled brain, maybe it was the wind, maybe it was God. To this day, I don't know. But I heard this voice, and it said, basically, excuse the language, stop bullshitting me. That's what it said. It said, hey, look, your lecture, you did some good at the United Nations, great. But now you got worried about money and you panicked, and now you're lecturing on cruise ships and dancing widows around the dance floor. And if you get out of this, it's such a sweet life, you're going to lecture on another cruise ship. And your ideals of service, the ideals that led you to take those risks with the Cubans and the Iranian hostages, they're going to disappear. You got to get serious about your ideals. You have to devote your life to these ideals, or you're going to die, and you might as well die because the next 50 years aren't going to be worth anything. Make a choice. Basically, God said, piss or get off the pot. My ego was deflated. I was dying. I knew I had only a short time to live. And so I just turned my face into that storm. And I said, yes, okay, it's a deal. And I know this sounds like that grade B movie, but in that instant of submission, this Coast Guard cutter, the Boutwell, comes crashing through this violent storm. It was so right on. It would have cut us in two had the lookout not finally seen us. And so we're all rescued. And I never looked back on that promise. I came back to New York. I joined the Giraffe Project, which, as I said, was started by this wonderful woman whom I soon married, named Ann Medlock. And the rest of my life has been devoted to fulfilling that promise of trying to be as much service as I can, and by talking about things I know something about, like risk taking, courage, and I never look back. So that's a story I tell a lot, because it's a good story, but it also is the story of what's important. What's important wasn't my physical risk taking. Wasn't important. What's important certainly wasn't making money on cruise ships. What's important was living a life that had real meaning, that I knew was real meaning. I had a taste of that at the United Nations, the things that I did. And there was more than just the Cuba caper, I call it, lots of things. And it was important. That's what was important. And at that point, these CEOs around the table or I'm talking to are in that hotel ballroom, I guarantee you, they're on the edge of their seats and they're listening. And I'm saying, look, I'm not saying you're ever going to be in a typhoon, almost dying in a lifeboat, but there's going to be challenges in your life. There's going to be challenges in your life where you're going to have to make some decisions, and you're going to have to pull yourself together and make some decisions. And the key thing is to figure out what's meaningful in your life. And maybe it isn't being in this particular business world. Maybe it is, or maybe it's something else. But there may be something waiting for you, and you need to listen, because whether it's God or it's the wind, something will talk to you about what's really meaningful, and you need to listen.
Wow. Well, thank you, John. That is such a riveting story. I can't imagine what it felt like to be in those moments. But it's so impressive how you were able to take that experience and then, transform yourself to have such an impact on other leaders to do good and now share your stories to influence others. And I think that storytelling, especially, in business to business, in the technology world, it can be really easy or tempting to try to make your company's story about the features and functions of the technology and how great it is. And there's certainly a role for that. And you need proof points and ROI metrics and all of that. But I think oftentimes the actual story of where, like we were talking about earlier in the conversation around what is that vision, what is the mission that you're on to solve, as a leader, as a founder of the organization, why did you start the business? And those are really the stories that I think help people build that emotional connection and can really set a company apart. So I think that's a perfect place to wrap up our conversation today. And, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to reach you?
Oh, email is best. That's Graham at giraffe, giraffe.org. Also, let's see, can I promo my book? My memoir is called Quest, Quest, subtitle Risk, Adventure, and the Search for Meaning, available in the usual places. Yeah. Oh, and I have a website as well, which is my name, johngraham.org. More on me than you want to know. And I got plenty more stories.
That is wonderful. Thank you. We'll include links to those in the episode notes. Well, thank you so much, John. This has really been a fantastic conversation, and I was certainly on the edge of my seat hearing.
Well, you've been a great interviewer, Natalie. And thank you so much for inviting me. And I think it's a lovely show you're doing, and it's really important. So thank you.
Thank you. And also thank you to our listeners. If today's episode gave you some new perspectives or some new encouragement, please share this episode with someone. We know that spreading these kinds of experiences and stories really helps all of us grow as leaders and equips us to drive successful transformation in our organization and in ourselves. So thank you again, John. And this has been another wonderful conversation on Shift and Thrive. I'll see you all next time. That's a wrap for this week's episode. For show notes and more, visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com. A special thank you to our sponsor, Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service marketing agency to help B2B companies fuel their growth. For more information on Magnitude and to get your complimentary transformation readiness assessment, visit magnitudeconsulting.com/getready. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.